Hi, my name is Joseph Mwaisaka, and I'm part of Studio Resilient Futures from the University of Sheffield M.Arch. I present to you Hydrosocial Futures, my Year 6 thesis. Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia and Herzegovina, is facing a severe water crisis. According to Bosnia's Danube water program, access to drinking water is averaged at half a liter of water a day, forcing residents to adopt survival tactics once seen during the siege of Sarajevo in 1992. The aging underground water infrastructure in the city was heavily bombed during the siege of Sarajevo, and now 70% of the water supplied through this pipeline is wasted away every single day. Cut-offs in the water supply are regular and are mainly prioritized for industrial and construction projects in the city as the crisis ravages the residential zones. This has greatly angered the public. The city's glorified natural water resource, the Mwaisaka, is a river that cuts through the city but is polluted and is flooding as months go by. The city's wastewater drains directly to it, and the only wastewater treatment plant, damaged and looted during the siege, is inadequate to address growing demands of clean water provision. 150 million euros in EU grants offered to the Bosnian government to address the crisis are to date unaccounted for, further fueling both political and social unrest in the capital. For a nation visibly split amongst political allegiances and ethnic issues, a water crisis is bringing people together, but subsequently not healing this shared wound. What were once even social norms, such as competitive diving, swimming, and sunbathing that flourished along the Mwaisaka, are slowly dying out. For a city's past that's intertwined its people with its iconic river, conversations about water futures in such a crisis haven't been as poignant and as serious as ever before. Hydrosocial Futures examines an intertwined socio-natural process where water and the community make and remake one another in an exploration and curation of resilience for post-conflict Sarajevo. The Mwaisaka, viewed in this context as the heart of the city and a potential post-conflict transformational tool, will shape and define the hydro and social aspects of this architectural story as I delve into how a river can address a shared crisis and coalesce a divided social fabric. Mapping the Mwaisaka is introduced as phase 1 of this hydrosocial future. It entails a more holistic view of the river as a living, breathing organism at first, and it is viewing it as a social infrastructure comprised of the bridges that are mapped along it with their historic narratives, the existing water supply network, and the city in perspective. Starting this exploration at a smaller scale, I examined the water cart as a siege-time resilient object in the water crisis of wartime Sarajevo. This led to a development of my own future resilient object, borrowed from the same siege-time narratives, a task that later prompted me to first map out both the past and future of Sarajevo's water crisis against that of the world. The product is this timeline of the hydro crisis, predicting a future in 2030 when the rising Mwaisaka waters are a flood threat and the Sarajevo municipality, in conjunction with the UN, pushes for a small-scale cleanup exercise of the river. Staged for now resilient 2031, the Mwaisaka Cleanup Protocol is born, an AI-based program cataloging the ever-changing river, tracking both the pollutants and biodiversity present. Predicted rise in water levels, the extent of pollution, the range of underwater species present are all recorded by the MCP program. It makes use of a sophisticated track and trace device to scan the river and feed live data straight to the MCP database, facilitated by an MCP software accessible on all Windows, Android, and iOS devices. As a buildable prototype, I tested out my future resilient object back at home on a 1:1 scale at the Sheffield's River Don, with the overarching idea that we could map the biodiversity and the pollutants present in the Mwaisaka River. Phase 2 is examined on a building scale, the Hydrosocial Master Plan, a sustainable alternative water source for the people and a call for a city more engaged with its river, frames the brief for a center that supplies free filtered water from the Mwaisaka and reinvigorates social activities along its banks. It starts with restoring and reintroducing the Bent Bassa diving competition, the city's first hydrosocial activity. The first stage of filtering Mwaisaka waters will then start as a pre-treatment process underneath the Vijitnitsia public square. From this new water square, the water makes its way along the distribution channel, where also TAT devices will be positioned for scanning the Mwaisaka. The old and derelict Walters Power Station at the heart of the city welcomes the later stages of filtration and will serve as the public's first ever filtration square, an idea that was heavily inspired by site-specific hydrosocial narratives. This abandoned power station that is the glory of the city inspired the narrative of breathing new energy and life into it, one of fluid power. The site is within a flood risk zone of the Margin Devor area of the city. The site program entails an adaptive reuse of two listed buildings on Walters Power Station as the filtration hub and the administrative hub. An extensive riverfront will form part of the sitescape. Walters Bridge, purposed for generating sustainable hydropower energy, is one of the few hydropower bridges proposed along the Mwaisaka and further doubles up as an additional diving point. As the water now enters the site, holding tanks to help regulate the inflow channel it to the filtration hub. Filtration then resumes inside the coagulation, flocculation, and sedimentation tanks. These filtration chambers, unconventionally raised above ground, offer an intimate and educational experience for the public, highlighting and making visible and occasionally hidden parts of the filtration process. Not only is it part of the primary access through, staff are welcome to hold constructive discussions underneath the glass bays and the brick arches. As the sediment from the filtration is collected in a sludge dewatering station for drying, the water is filtered further through a phytopurification pool, naturally, and disinfected before it's considered safe for drinking. At the Civic Forum is where the filtration terminates. A targeted capacity of 19,000 liters of water is filtered per day here. And to collect your free water, an elaborate water tap at the rear end is approached across a central bridge within the Civic Forum. A green alert on an autumn noon signals an ongoing protest within the forum about saving the last wild rivers of the Balkan region, while an afternoon on a warm summer, an amber alert signals that the Civic Forum has welcomed the flood and has now become the city's public pool. The ground source heat pump, located at the basement service chambers, provides sufficient heating for the building and for the pool. Learning spaces that are now on the upper floor and within the administrative hub cater for research work, whilst an accessible footbridge on the second floor offers an elevated look into the filtration hub and is also purposed as staff access for maintenance work on the filtration chambers. After having collected my free water, the exit past the sludge dewatering station confronts me with the sediment residue that was left after filtration. A clear reminder of just how dirty the river water is. It is dried in portions, ready to be packaged as dry soil or compost for construction or local farming. Once outside, the riverfront that was once a parking zone is lively again, bringing the public a little closer to the Mwaisaka waters. Walking across the bridge, staff from the MCP are installing new track and trace devices, whilst a couple of locals are jumping off the diving platform into the clear waters of the Mwaisaka. Long-lost hydrosocial habits that once brought life to the Mwaisaka are introduced back again. In this age of climate change adaptation, Welcoming the flood is one of the specific sustainable principles embraced as a bold and ambitious design strategy for the site. The new build retrofit spaces are proposed at 900 mm above the flood risk zone on the site, thus creating a cavity through which the river waters pass through to flood the civic forum. Any excess flood water is then channeled away from the city and site for stormwater collection. This cavity, in other enclosed spaces, accommodates a thermal labyrinth for natural ventilation and night purging. Adaptive reuse being another sustainable strategy focused on how the new build retrofit ties in with the existing heritage building fabric, influencing further the choice of earthen materials such as rammed earth, CLT, and brick. As a building composite, these component layers of the floors and the filtration process are carefully tied into one complex building that, when situated now within the grander picture of this master plan, they complement the early visions of Sarajevo's hydrosocial future. Walter's Bridge, the filtration hub, and an extensive riverfront paint the picture of one of the few initiatives dotted along the river. The filtration square, now actively hosting diving competitions prior to Sarajevo's Winter Olympics, engages the river once more with the locals. In a cry for political reform in 2035, at a time when the nation itself seeks accession into the EU, this extensive hydrosocial plan will heal the shared wounds of a water crisis, bringing both different ethnicities and political parties together as one. Sarajevo becomes a now pioneering instigator and a successful example of a new form of resilience, hydrosocial futures. Thank you.